Euromaxx highlights. Coming up in today's show, big attraction. Tourists look for traces of the Berlin Wall 50 years after it was built. French fascination. 18th century court fashion still influence today's designers. And United Chefs. 5 Michelin-starred chefs work on one meal in an Alpine castle. Euromaxx highlights. And here's your host, Louise Houghton.
Hello and welcome to the Highlight Show. We begin by looking at a classical musician whose reputation is growing internationally as he's aiming to change our perception of the sound of a guitar. Miloš's latest album, Mediterraneo, has topped the British and German classical charts. But his debut album, The Guitar, has now also made it into the pop charts, showing that his unique sound is clearly appealing to a wider audience. He's currently on tour in Europe, so we went to catch up with him in the Italian town of Cortona.
Miloš Karadaglić and the Orchestra della Toscana play the Concerto de Aranjuez, one of the most famous compositions for guitar and orchestra. Miloš Karadaglić from Montenegro has come to Cortona for a guest appearance.
I always believed and always made it, let's say, my mission to show to people that classical guitar is the most accessible of all the classical instruments, because guitar is an instrument in almost every household. It crosses over the boundaries of classical and mainstream.
His new album, Mediterraneo, features 17 solo guitar pieces with one thing in common. All the composers come from Mediterranean countries.
I find the inspiration in everything. I keep an open mind. I like to be influenced by everything that I see and that I do. But where I feel most comfortable and where I feel at home and where I feel that my music comes out freely is in a place like this.
Karadaglić received his first guitar at the age of 8. The ambitious youngster practiced up to 4 hours a day. At 14, he left his native country for the first time on an invitation to perform in Paris. The experience changed his life.
I remember when I got the invitation to go to Paris, it was like I won a lottery. That's how I felt. It was like the wildest possible dream. And I remember feeling so happy, and remember feeling how lucky I am to be here, and why am I here is because of the guitar.
At 17, Karadaglić applied to the Royal Academy of Music in London and was accepted. Since graduating in 2004, he's been traveling the world giving concerts. He feels especially comfortable in Italy, not least because of the food.
Buongiorno, buongiorno. Uno piccolo cono di suo migliore gelato. Prego, grazie, prego, grazie.
His latest solo album, Mediterraneo, has put him on the map. Many critics have hailed him as the new star of classical music. He's also causing a stir on the streets of Cortona.
It's wonderful, leaves me speechless, very moving.
I always wanted to travel around the world, always wanted to meet people, always wanted to play many concerts, always wanted to be surrounded by happy faces that share the music, share the passion, share the love. And now I'm doing exactly that, and that makes me tremendously happy.
His concert at Teatro Signorelli in Cortona was completely sold out. Miloš has concerts coming up in New York, Berlin, and Paris. But first, he's planning to pay a well-earned visit to his homeland, Montenegro.
And I hope to be going along when he comes here to Berlin. Now, Berlin is in the midst of a very significant month, as it was 50 years ago that the Berlin Wall was built. The city was, of course, then divided for 28 years. But since November 1989, when the wall thankfully came down, a whole new industry has evolved, catering to tourists who come looking for traces of Berlin's Cold War past.
Nature is gradually reclaiming the last remnants of the Berlin Wall. You can now cycle along the Mauerweg, the route along which the border once ran. Often you have to look hard to find traces of the wall. This watchtower now stands in the middle of a new housing complex. A line of cobblestones now marks where the wall once was. Even when the border was underground, it was heavily fortified. That's one thing Dietmar Arnold from the Berlin Underworlds Association reveals in his tour of tunnels through which people once fled to West Berlin. Arnold tells of risky escapes through subway tunnels, the sewer system, or tunnels people dug themselves under the border fortifications.
You have to ask yourself what impels people to risk their lives digging a tunnel more than 100 meters long. You don't know if it'll collapse. Anything was possible. Or you climb out and end up getting caught by the Stasi. People died trying to escape. The fact that people were forced to take such a risk shows to what extent the wall had no respect for human dignity.
The highlight at the end of the tour, to meet someone who dug such tunnels. Hasso Herschel is one of the best-known people who helped others escape from East Germany. He dug his first tunnel in fall 1961. They started in a basement in West Berlin. Herschel and 8 friends dug for 5 months to make a 145-metre-long tunnel. None of them had any experience. They couldn't let a single sound escape to the surface because they were tunnelling under the fortified border. In the east, they would have faced years in prison. The process was documented by a film team. A total of 29 people managed to escape in this way.
Wir haben uns das gegenseitig versprochen. Mir hat einer geholfen.
We promised to help each other. Someone got me a Swiss passport. I made promises to my sister and friends, another reason to keep the promise. And there was the sense of triumph. By then, people had died trying to flee. You mustn't forget that. There's talk of many walls in the world, but no other was directed against a country's own people.
The entrance to Hasso Herschel's first tunnel is in the basement of this building. He dug 2 other tunnels. Then he specialised in escapes in cars that had been converted for the purpose. In all, he helped 1,000 people escape to freedom. The house am Checkpoint Charlie has been in existence for 49 years. It's one of the most popular museums in Berlin. Located right by a former border crossing that was the scene of dramatic standoffs between Soviet and Western forces during the Cold War. The private museum provides documentation on the era when Germany was divided and stories of escape attempts. There's a hot air balloon, for instance, in which 2 families managed to flee in 1979. And a car reinforced with cement. Interest in the history of the wall is enormous. Every year, 850,000 people visit the museum, most of them under the age of 30.
We don't show much suffering. Instead, we show people's courage and what they were able to do to fight this injustice. And that courage gave other people courage. And the courage we've communicated by showing these successful escapes was and remains very important, because the world still isn't always the way we'd like it to be.
Another way to explore the border is a relatively new canoe tour on the Spree River. Until 1989, the border formed by the waterway was patrolled by heavily armed East German border guards. Two young Germans who never saw the wall themselves came up with the idea.
People who lived or worked in these buildings saw what was happening in the East every day. That's unique, because otherwise the view was always blocked.
The two tour guides tell of a spectacular escape in 1962, in which crew members of an excursion ship got the captain drunk and used the ship to flee to West Berlin.
After the incident with the ship, an underwater grid was built along the whole line so that swimmers couldn't simply dive through anymore.
20 years ago, border guards still patrolled along this jetty. Wall tours are very popular with tourists.
It's an adventure they want to hear about, and when they see it, it's a bit more vivid. I can't judge whether it has political or educational value.
Many of the 10 million or so tourists here want to learn something about the wall and the Cold War era. And hardly any city offers better opportunities to do so than Berlin.
The French court in the 18th century, under the reign of Louis XIV, was famous for its lavish lifestyle and its high fashion. This extravagant era has continued to fascinate and inspire the arts and design worlds right up to the present day. Echoes of French regal style on today's catwalks are now the focus of a new exhibition which claims the 18th century back in fashion.
Vivienne Westwood in 1996. Jean-Paul Gaultier in 1998, and Dior in 2005 and 2008. In that year, Christian Lacroix also looked to the 18th century for inspiration. Now, contemporary takes on courtly costume are on show in Versailles, alongside with the historic originals. This dress is 15 years old. This one over 200. Despite the intervening centuries, these outfits from the last 90 years aren't as different from 18th century fashion as one might think.
They are both talking about social status and wealthiness. And of course, when you have a sack dress in a beautiful silk textile, or when you are wearing a Chanel high fashion dress, it means that it's quite vulgar to say that, but it means that you are able to offer this kind of dress, and it means that you are also living in a society which has this social code.
The exhibition is showing in Versailles, a 30-minute drive south of Paris. The palace that long served as the center of political power in France is still one of the country's biggest tourist draws. Its pomp and glamour had a tremendous influence on arts and architecture across Europe.
At the 18th century, the French court was one of the most prestigious. What we like to think that it was the most prestigious, but of course not. There was the English one, the Swedish one, and Danish one, and Spanish one. But anyway, it was one of the most prestigious courts. And all the European court were looking at us.
Over 200 years after the French Revolution, Versailles has lost none of its mystique. Designer Karl Lagerfeld is one of its many famous fans.
Ich liebe Versailles. I love Versailles. I love fashion. I love fashion throughout the centuries. Today we have movie stars and red carpets. Back then we admired aristocrats' costumes.
Lagerfeld's admiration of 18th century fashion has often been reflected in the collections he designs for Chanel. In the current exhibition, these are presented together with the costumes that inspired them. The originals are stored in darkened rooms with strictly regulated temperatures.
Of course, they are not copying, strictly 18th century dress. For them, it is kind of fancy or dream. 18th century inspiration gives them the right to be luxurious.
Take Dior's modern twist on Rococo flamboyance. Typically, it featured stylized silhouettes, flouncy fabrics, and lavish embroidery. Now as then, it's all about creating a fantasy.
all these centuries are dialoguing. So you can see that there is a really that high fashion is coming from all this 18th century luxury fashion. So there is a thread, a real thread, and that it's also interesting to observe how fashion is looking at herself and consuming. She's consuming herself.
The exhibition provides a glimpse into a world of high fashion that's no less enchanting in 2011 than it was during the days of Marie Antoinette.
Now, everyday objects are items that are often taken for granted, but German artist René Wirths is dedicated to showing them in a new light. Whether a tape, cassette, a slice of bread or a wheel, his hyper-realistic paintings bring out every tiny detail. 50 of his larger-than-life works are currently on display in the Dutch city of Rotterdam, so we went to take a very close look.
It looks like the photo of a football, but it's actually an oil painting. In these paintings, everyday objects look as though they're being viewed through a magnifying glass. Every tiny detail is visible. Berlin-based artist René Wirths often uses simple objects from around the house as subjects for his paintings. Each large work takes about a month to complete.
The appeal is in the effect and the illusion of the pictures. When the object stops just being an object and becomes an object in a picture, then as a viewer, I'm forced to connect things in my own head.
With each stroke of the brush, René gives life to his objects. Like this model digger. On the canvas, it's 10 times as big as it really is. The artist is especially interested in the process of painting. Wirths prefers to work alone in his Berlin studio. That gives him the peace and quiet he needs to be creative.
When I paint, I feel free. That means when I go to work, I have free time. When I go home, I have to work. That's nice. I like working here.
René's key themes are appearances, reality, and perception. This magnified portrayal of a toilet paper roll transforms it into a work of art. A total of 50 paintings are on display in this exhibition in Rotterdam. The exhibition includes the works that René Wirths has created in the last 6 years. This basket lid was painted in 2005. Wirths' pictures sometimes fetch up to 32,000 euros.
You can see more in his work. You can wander around and have a look at it again and again, and from every angle you see something new. And although it's just an object, it's really more than that.
Wirths pays attention to detail. Here in this bicycle lamp or in a water glass, you can make out the reflection of the artist at work in his studio. Wirths has had this red bicycle since the 1990s. He rides it regularly through Berlin. The artist finds inspiration in many places. He's fascinated by objects that have signs of wear and tell a story.
Here you can see some potentially interesting objects. These half shoes, these cross sections, or this sole allow you to see the stages of work, just like in the painting process. I think it's wonderful.
René's latest project is a trumpet. It's about 25 years old. He makes the frames for his pictures himself. He chooses the sizes spontaneously. The artist draws outlines in charcoal so that he can easily make changes later. The trumpet picture should be finished in about 3 weeks' time.
It's a symbol for the muse, but it also just looks beautiful. More than anything else, it has lots and lots of reflections of the world, the environment, my studio, of me. I haven't even counted them. I'll probably never count them. There are probably hundreds.
And René Wirths is sure to paint many of them too. more work to add to the rest of his fascinating collection.
I don't know if I'll ever look at my shoes in the same way again. Now, if you're feeling a little hungry, our next report has a meal to whet your appetite, as it's cooked by 5 Italian chefs with Michelin star status. This year, they're co-hosting 5 evenings at 5 different castles, and we snuck along to the 3rd event taking place in northern Italy.
South Tyrol is known for its beautiful scenery and breathtaking views. Thanks to a mild climate and lots of sun, the soil is rich and fertile. The landscape is dotted with castles and palaces. It's truly a place to relax and enjoy the surroundings. CastlesBerllin Castle near Murano has been uninhabited for the last 15 years. But 5 top chefs believe it's a perfect place to host a fancy dinner for 140 people. Everything has to be hauled in days before the dinner. The guests pay €110 each for the food and the enchanting atmosphere. The old castle kitchen is full of treasures and artifacts. So a mobile kitchen was brought in just for the dinner. Top chef Jörg Trefoyer from a nearby restaurant is responsible for organizing the evening.
The biggest problem was putting the kitchen together and making sure there was enough electricity and water available. If we're able to get the dishware sorted before tonight, we've accomplished a lot.
The 4 other top chefs arrive late afternoon, accompanied by their own assistants and appliances for the evening's task. They may look like a social club gearing up for a barbecue, but these star chefs say they're celebrating the art of food.
We've moved over here because there's too much of a draft for my dish. Everything dries out too fast. It's a complex dish and time is a factor, so I need a room where there's no draft.
This ambitious undertaking was Gerhard Wieser's idea.
We work well together, and that's what makes it fun. Each of us brings our own philosophy into the cooking. When we were putting together the menu, we met and I said, I can do the dessert with local apricots. Someone else said they would do the fish, another the meat, and we made sure there was no doubling up.
The first dish is mackerel served on apples and ginger. The fish is smoked. Then comes a risotto with 3 different kinds of tomatoes and shrimp. Too many cooks aren't spoiling the broth so far.
You get to see new things and try new things. It's really great.
The 140 guests hail from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Italy. The dinner was sold out weeks ago. The steps leading to the 3 dining rooms are steep and uneven. An especially big challenge for the wait staff. Many had to be trained specially for the evening. Everything has to appear effortless to the guests. There are 20-minute pauses between each dish, and the chefs continually switch roles in the kitchen. They each get to take the lead when their dish is up. The 3rd plate is dumplings filled with cream cheese, pears, and hazelnut milk.
The stressful part is that all the plates have to be taken out at the same time. The waiters have to take everything up those steps, all at the same time.
The main dish is the most complicated. Goat meat with cocoa, lingonberries, and red cabbage ice cream served on goat pastry. And then the dessert. As promised, variations on the apricot, a South Tyrolean specialty.
Delicious food. Wonderful.
Really terrific food, a wonderful atmosphere, nice people. It was a great evening.
The success has inspired the chefs to do more. They're planning 2 more dinners this year in South Tyrol's Alpine castles.
Oh, my stomach is rumbling now. But just before we sign off, remember that you can see all of those reports again on our website. Just click on dw-world.de/English/Euromaxx-highlights. Thanks for being with us today. Do join us again soon. But for now, from myself and the entire team here in Berlin, bye-bye.